Alyssa has a dream. She tells me about it Friday evenings. We're curled up on the bed in my flat, which is only a little bigger than her car, but much more comfortable. We have some music playing, soft and smooth. I've set some candles up around the room, and they're flickering gently in the breeze, blowing in off the sea, 3 streets distant, through the slightly raised window. Out there the sky is blue, like velvet. In here everything is orange and warm. It's a recurring dream she's had since childhood. She can't remember when it started or why, and she's never told anybody about it before. There's not much to it, really, she tells me with a nervous laugh, but it's so frightening. It's the most frightening dream she's ever had, and she doesn't know why. And lately, it's been much more regular. She's alone, and it's night, and she's standing at the very end of a pier somewhere, staring out to sea. It's not one of the broad, garishly lit piers like we have propping this town up, but an ancient wooden thing, long and narrow enough for only one person. She can feel it sway beneath her as the sea laps at it. The pier is old, twisted by the elements until it resembles something from a funhouse or a fever. Behind her, she knows without looking, is so much nothing. Miles of darkness, empty fields and wet marshland. Not a single light to be seen. Nobody around to see or hear her. Nobody who could help if she should need it. Nobody to turn to for comfort. And before her it seems the same. The sky, vast and dark blue. The sea, vast and dark blue. A full moon, white as bleached bone, bloated as something pregnant or a teardrop waiting to fall, holds itself low in the sky, just above its shattered reflection in the sea. A reflection which seems like a jagged pathway right to the pier where she stands. If something were to step down from the moon, it need only follow the light, and it will find her. It's not merely the moon which is troubling her, terrible as it seems in this dream. Out there at the point where sea meets sky, a black line is thickening like spilled ink or blood, and she knows that a storm is brewing. Many miles out across the waves, the clouds will be churning and black as sin, black as utter despair. The waves will be rising, angry and agitated, and this storm will be heading towards her. It's already on its way. She wants to be away from here, but doesn't want to run. Whether she is held immobile by fear, or the thought of turning and fleeing towards the impenetrable darkness with a storm at her heels, she doesn't know. But the longer she stands there, the more she feels as though she has been left out here like some kind of sacrifice to whatever is on its way. And it comes within, or in the form of, this storm. Veins of ice-white lightning race across the agitated clouds, stirring up yet more darkness. The waves are growing. Out at sea they are huge things that could sweep away ships and still be hungry for coastal villages by the time they reach land. She can see them with a clarity terribly unaffected by distance, gigantic claws of something down beneath the water, tearing at the sky. This storm, so much worse than any that she, or even the world, has ever seen before, is on its way towards her with a speed and power that is nothing less than awesome, and nothing less than terrifying. The sky and the sea rage, and Alyssa waits for what she hopes will be the end, and not merely of everything that she knows. She can feel the first of its physical presence already, the fine spray thrown up from the waves that will soon be holding themselves, however briefly, so high above her. And the moon looks down, cold, unloving, awful. Before he died, my father researched myth and folklore. There's still a wealth of books on the subject up in the converted attic of my parents' house, and I used to sometimes wander around in there when I visited my mother. There was even his telescope set in front of the skylight at the back of the house, now and probably forever capped and blind. There's so much myth based around the moon, but none of it very pleasant. In ancient myth, it was seen as something which took back the souls of the dead and where they would wait for rebirth. People have believed there to be some kind of man in the moon even before the associated deities with it. Falling asleep outdoors with the light of it shining upon you was said to drive you insane. Long before the days of artificial lighting, the full moon became associated with magic, and witches were said to have the power to draw down the moon from the sky. Indeed, modern-day Wiccans still perform a symbolic version of this rite. But I've no doubt that some things are best left alone. There's an old local myth that I came across in my father's notebooks one day. I don't like to think about it. It may even have something to do with why I stopped looking through his papers, stopped going into that crowded little room beneath the sloping roof beams with its fading scents of pipe smoke and leather. It was a story in which the people of this area bore witness to a month in which 2 full moons hung side by side in the night sky. Summer brings the fitful tourist trade to town, or at least stirs up some of the locals who hide away for the rest of the year. I go walking one evening, following the smell of the sea to the promenade and the amusement arcade on the pier, huge and tired-looking, yet stuffed with light, like a skull that's been used as a light shade. If anything, the increased trade makes me, or the town, feel lonelier. There's something desperate about all the milling around, faltering grins as sunburnt faces cool off in the evening darkness and look around for something to please them. The tired drone and chatter and clunk of the old machines stirred into life after being impregnated by a coin or two. But things have been weighing on my mind lately, and I find I'm not sleeping so well. It feels like I'm living through the world's growing pains, but I sincerely hope that's an idea, as ridiculous as it sounds. When the light and noise and crowds fail to reassure me, I turn and leave. I used to love walking along the promenade, right to the top of a hill and looking back on the lights of the little old town spread out before me. I used to love the night sky, the roar of the surf. These things being tainted day by day. I don't want to look up at the moon, obscenely swollen, and the swelling of the waves makes me uncomfortable. The sea seems to be fighting against something, pushing its way out, reaching for the sky. Down on the beach, a drunk is staggering. I imagine he's drunk because of the way he moves and how he is yelling to himself. Either distance or his condition render the words unintelligible, though he seems to be beating at his own head. A dog is following from a wary distance, slinking between the struts of the pier. Its eyes glimmer coldly. I'm seeing a lot of strange things lately. We argue about what it's not important. As so often, when lovers fight, the reason is trivial and soon forgotten. I wasn't sorry straight away. For a whole half an hour, I was glad that she stormed out of my flat, and when she didn't come back almost immediately, and I heard her car start up down on the street, I used my anger to justify those feelings. She came back hours later, looking like I'd never seen her before, pale, childlike, helpless. There's no question of either one of us having to say we were sorry, no discussion about what had gone on between us. The fight was way down on the list of priorities, and I wanted only to hold her and make her feel better, and she, in turn, wanted only to be held and to feel better. I was able to hold her, if nothing else. I think it's going to take a great deal before either of us feel better again. Most of the time, I don't think that will ever happen now. I held her until daylight came and banished some of the darkness, and in that time she told me what had happened after she'd left that night, and then neither one of us spoke until the morning. There was nothing to say. You know how when you're ill, there's this one thing wrong with you, and it's all you can think about, and right then you just want to be normal again. Right now, I just want the world to be normal again. But I've got a horrible feeling that this illness is terminal. After she'd left, Alyssa just wanted to go and cool down. The argument, whatever it had been, had wound her up and left her feeling angry and a little sad and even a little stupid, as is the way of meaningless fights. She got in her car, slammed the door, pulled out of a tight space. She headed back along the promenade past the pier and the amusement arcade. A gang of teenagers watch from inside their hoods. They may as well be cowled ghosts for all that is visible of them. The lights and noise seem as repulsive to her as they did to me when I visited during the week, and she drives across the bridge into the town centre, which at this time is mostly dead. Along the one-way system, past the harbour and the docks, and then towards the outskirts of town. When the street lamps fall away, there is only the pale darkness of a summer night sky, and she winds the window down to enjoy the calming breeze, already beginning to feel a little better, hearing the soft crash of the waves from just out of sight. The road leads uphill past the lighthouse and then away towards the next town, some 7 miles distant. She wants only solitude, and she pulls off the road onto a narrow track that leads towards a seafront car park. Quiet even during the day, this far from the tourist traps of the town centre, at this hour she is surprised to see even one more vehicle here. A small van parked in the dead centre of the front row, facing out to sea. Perhaps somebody like herself, she thinks, who just needs to relax after a bitch of a day. She parks parallel to it 20 yards to the right and switches off her engine to let the sounds of the night gently fall in upon her. There's a contradictory calmness about the sea. Despite the endless raging of the waves breaking themselves apart upon the earth as the impenetrably black depths urge them on, anyone who's spent time on the shore will know what I mean. It's a beautiful sight and a beautiful sound, even if I'm becoming increasingly unsettled by it these days. Alyssa sits staring out at the wine-dark sea beneath the moonlight, and of course her nightmare is never far from her mind. She tries to relax, lets out a long shuddering breath, and along with it much of the tension that has built up since our silly fight. Tears come to her eyes and she sinks forward into her hands. After a few seconds, she remembers the van parked nearby and hopes she isn't creating an unwittingly interesting diversion for the occupant. She glances out, across at the vehicle, and this is what she sees. At first, only the van, the sort that might belong to a self-employed tradesman. There are no markings on its side, but a discoloured patch where a logo may once have been. Then she sees the occupant, a middle-aged man the wrong side of plump, sitting in the darkness of the interior and staring out to sea. Relieved that she hasn't drawn attention to herself, Alyssa is about to turn away when she notices the man's mouth moving, and as she can clearly see he is alone, at first assumes he's using a hands-free phone, but then changes her mind. His mouth looks less like it is talking than writhing involuntarily. She knows she shouldn't be staring and yet is unable to tear her gaze away. His lips writhe and twist and his own mouth seems to be intent upon sliding around his face. There's something so unusual in the sight that it is compelling, horribly fascinating in the way that only utter strangeness can be. There must be something wrong with the man, she thinks, and she really mustn't stare. Yet here comes his hand to wave at her, and he must have seen her after all. No, he's not waving. Indeed, he's still staring straight ahead, out at the sinuous waves rushing the concrete wall beyond the car park. His hand seems to be slapping at the window of the van, as though eager to fly out into the night. She wonders if he's having some kind of fit or seizure. Perhaps she should get out and try to help in some way. And yet an awful feeling of wrongness pins her to her seat, as effectively as a stake. The man is struggling with his hands. He has no control over them, and his face looks anguished as he stares out at the sea. His hands flail around, and it must be only the movement which makes Alyssa think that there seem to be too many of them. But what then causes them to bat against the window like moths, unnaturally long fingers with far too many knuckles tapping against the glass? It couldn't be happening. No hands could look like these ones do. No hands could be so uncontrollable. No fingers so many-jointed. She wants desperately to look away. The faster they move, the more there seem to be of them, and the longer they seem to be, until she can barely see the man's face, his twisting mouth, beyond the network of branches that his hands have become. But when his head snaps to one side and his eyes focus on her, she finds the strength to twist the key in the ignition and bring the car to life. Alyssa was frightened of many things right at that moment. She was frightened that the car wouldn't start, and as soon as it did, that it would fail and leave her stranded, that she might have to leave its meagre security and run into the darkness. She was frightened that the van would follow her, perhaps overtake her or run her off the road, and that she would find out all too well just what was happening to its bizarre occupant. She tried to concentrate and to not look at the van, as though the sight of whatever was going on in there might be enough to freeze her into inaction once more. But she couldn't help a glimpse from the corner of her eye as she turned the car for the exit. She could still see the silently screaming face, though less and less of it behind the blur of active and unnatural fingers beating themselves bloody against the glass. She kept watch of a van in the rearview mirror until the trees that loomed over the road began to seem too threatening, and she watched them as she drove uphill, wishing to reassure herself that it was only a sea breeze that was causing them to twist and shake. The van and its occupant didn't follow her. They may still be there now, though I don't want to think about what state they're in. If there had been some kind of resolution or climax to the unnerving incident, then, funnily enough, I don't think it would have seemed so bad if it had wrapped itself up in some neat little package like things always do in the movies or in books. But the fact that it didn't feels unbearably foreboding. Strange things are happening out there in the town, in the night, beneath the moon. I wish I could reassure Alyssa, reassure myself, but this can only get worse. We're only seeing the beginning of the end. In a variant of a local legend in my father's research, that second full moon in the sky hadn't been a moon at all. It was an egg sac the story goes, laid by something that was drawn out of the cold depths of space by the witchcraft that used to go on in these parts. Shortly after the 2 moons had been seen in the sky, there was a meteor shower which rained down around the area for 3 nights. By the time it was finished, there was only 1 moon left again, waning back into the darkness of the night sky. The seeds had been laid, it said, and in time something would grow. There's a full moon coming. Out there in the inky black sky, it grows fatter night by night, bloated with its weirdness. The moon pulls at the earth, draws the tides of the sea and of its seed. It calls its children, and they are growing up through the earth, up through the town around us, its trees, animals and people. We're going to see a lot of strange things by the time the moon is full, and I don't know if we'll want to live to see another one.